62 people present, so I think we will start. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon for this afternoon's webinar, which is focused on reading and education. Before we get into the business of the day, if you haven't already been muted or muted yourself, can you please do so? It helps cut down on background noise. If you're able to change your display name to reflect your name and your organisation's name, that helps us get a good overview of who's here. And just to warn you that we are recording the webinar and we'll be sharing excerpts and the full webinar through our YouTube channel later on. So if you're not happy to be part of that, then maybe anonymise your name and turn off your video. There is a chat box. Please use the chat box to post any questions or comments. We have time at the end for a question and answer, and we'll pick up on those as when we get to that time. So before we go into the education and reading aspect of today's webinar, I was going to do a short update on where things are up to with Oxfordshire Community Foundation and give some background information from one of our recent reports. So Kate, if you could share the slides. For those of you who know us, we have been dispersing funds through the Community Resilience Fund through the COVID pandemic, and have now sent out over £600,000 to over 130 organisations. And yeah, the most recently, you may have seen this on our social media and through our press releases, we have paid out 3 larger than normal strategic grants to critical organisations in Oxfordshire. Asylum Welcome, who are doing some very important work to support refugee and asylum seeker groups to become stronger and represent their constituents and their communities more effectively. Oxford Hub, who many of you will know were behind the Oxford Together movement in Oxford City, which saw a huge upsurge of volunteering and support for everyone in the Oxford community. They are doing things like white labelling their phone link service and using that to provide a service for other organisations across the county, and have got some interesting technological innovations in that. And then Sophia, who have been providing food to food banks and community larders, and they're undertaking a piece of work to make sure that there is good county-wide coverage for that service for everyone who needs it in the county. Next slide, please. We published a report last week looking at the economic impacts of COVID. It's available on our website, and I also wrote a blog about it. And in that report, we bring to light the fact that unemployment in Oxfordshire has risen considerably through lockdown, as you would imagine. So in some areas, we've seen 200 or 300% increases in unemployment. And whilst that is affecting areas that we would traditionally think of as being deprived or economically disadvantaged, it's also affecting quite a lot of much wealthier areas, and you're seeing people signing on, claiming benefits for the first time in their lives in many areas. Next slide. And obviously, an economic downturn that we're experiencing has a huge impact on families. And within the report it highlights the number of families in Oxfordshire who've got judged to have low levels of income. And these wards listed here on this table are those where the levels of child poverty or low income for families are higher than the national average. So that's quite a lot of areas. And again, whilst there's some of the names you would expect to see there, there's also places like Chipping Norton and Iffley Fields that you probably wouldn't expect to see in that sort of table. So these economic impacts are widespread and felt across the board. Next slide, please. Well, the next slide is looking at the educational attainment gap when we come to it, and how we know that in Oxfordshire, on entry into the school system, there is a gap of about 5.5 months between those kids experiencing disadvantage and other kids. Oh, we've lost the slides. Anyway, what the slide that you can't see would show is that the educational attainment gap widens as you go through the school system. So we know that kids enter into the system with those gaps there, and they only get wider and wider over time. And that's, thank you, Kate, the slide you can now see in front of you. And it shows that in the early years, there's about a 6-month gap between kids experiencing disadvantage. And I think free school meals is the measure there. That widens to about 12 or 13 months at Key Stage 2 and widens further to over 20 months by the end of Key Stage 4. And that's a very worrying trajectory, and this is why we in Oxfordshire Community Foundation and many others think that the early years is a critical place to focus attention, because that's where those gaps start, and they only get wider as children enter into the school system. So that's why you'll hear a lot of talk about the importance of early years in today's webinar. Now, I think final slide now. So we have array of speakers today. In a moment, I'll hand over to Helen Hastle, who's Regional Director at the Dollywood Foundation, and she's going to talk about their work providing educational gain and books, age-appropriate books for children in, before school. Sorry. We're then going to have an interview with Jane Rendle, who's Development Manager at Arch, Assisted Reading for Children in Oxfordshire. And then we'll hear finally from Bob Evans, who's been on radio this morning. You may have heard him, who is a fund holder with Oxfordshire Community Foundation and the Maggie Evans Fund. And they put a lot of effort over the years into supporting things like the Storytelling Museum. And then there will be time for a quick Q&A session at the end of that. So do post your questions in the chat box and we will try and pick those up at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Helen, who is going to talk to us about the work of the Dollywood Foundation. Helen, do you want to unmute yourself and share your screen? I can't see you. Have we lost Helen?
Hello.
Helen, hello. Good, you're still with us.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Can you see my screen?
No, and your video's off at the moment as well.
Well, that's a triumphant start, isn't it? Haven't I done well?
Excellent, we can see you now. So do you want to try and share your screen?
There we go. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, right. Apologies for that IT hitch there. My name's Helen Hastle. I'm the Regional Director for the South, which is England and Wales, for the Dollywood Foundation, and we deliver the programme Dolly Partons Imagination Library, which is a book gifting programme for children aged under 5. This is so what we do. Okay, now my slides won't move on either. Here we go. Okay, we're underway. So the Imagination Library is a collection of 60 carefully chosen books, and they're delivered directly to children at home. They arrive through the post every month, and they're available for children from birth until they turn 5. Each year of birth within that receives an age-appropriate book. So how it works is that we're the Dollywood Foundation, we're Dolly Partons charity in the UK. We've been operating in the UK for about 11 years. We've been operating in the US for nearly 30 years. And Dolly, through her various businesses, funds all our costs and overheads. So things like our book selection committee, my salary, the IT, and all those pieces of the jigsaw and the book order system. And we work with community partners who are responsible for 2 aspects of the programme. They're responsible for registering children on the book order system, and they're responsible for the cost of the books. And that works out at around £25 per child per year, or about £2.08 per book. And around £1 of that is the book, and the other part of that cost is the delivery. So the wrapping, putting the label on, and mailing it to the child. So it's very much their gift. So us plus community partner is the programme, and that's how we manage to put books in the hands of children. We operate all over the UK. We mail about 42,000 books a month to children under 5. That's about 500,000 books a year, and they all come from Penguin Random House. Penguin are very good to us. They print to order. We order the books a month in advance. They also do clever things like resize them, so they'll go through post boxes, letter boxes, and they also reduce the weight sometimes, like of covers and stuff, so that it will meet our cost model. The welcome book's The Tale of Peter Rabbit that every child receives, and that's got a little piece in the front by Dolly. And the graduation book is the wonderful Just Imagine. by Nick Sherritt and Pippa Goodhart, again with a little piece by Dolly. So in England, we've got around 142 programmes. There are all sorts of organisations who run these. We've got local authority-wide programmes. We've got small community programmes run by volunteers. We've got parish councils that run programmes, and we've got other charity partners. And there's around 36,000 children in England receiving the books every month. Wales is not so great. I've got one programme and 5 children, so that's not going quite so well. But obviously I would love to see the programme grow in Wales. In Scotland, we've got 67 programmes and just over 3,000 children. What's marvellous about Scotland is the Scottish government funds a programme for all care experienced and recently adopted children under 5 to receive our books, which is great. And then in Northern Ireland, we've got 12 programmes, most of which are through Sure Start centres in Belfast. Bringing it more local, in Oxfordshire, I'm delighted to say we've got 3 programmes. The first one is run by Oxfordshire County Council and the Virtual School, and that's run by the fabulous Christine Granderson, who organises that. And she's got around 140 children in Oxfordshire who are in care, receiving the books every month. We've also got PEEP, who run a programme on the Blackbird Lees estate, and they do a terrific job. They've been going since 2014, I think, and have managed to deliver over 33,000 books to children aged under 5 in that area, which is phenomenal. And then, of course, we've got our new programme with Oxfordshire Community Foundation, which is the sort of programme I really love because it's a from birth programme. So they're registering babies and working with and supporting those families right from the start. Which is fabulous because it means those babies, as they grow, will develop their own home libraries of around 60 books, which to me is just magical. So Dolly says you can never get enough books into the hands of enough children, and she does show an interest in what we do. She pops up every now and again. She has a bit of a thing for local TV. So she was on TV in Glasgow and the Gorbals last week when a new programme launched there. And when our programme in Hull launched in September, she popped up on North East Lincolnshire News, much to everyone's delight, and gave a very short interview there. So she does appear every now and again on media in the UK. So I thought it was really important just to explain what it is we actually do. But moving on to the impact, I don't think there's anything new in saying that book ownership and reading is a really good thing. And I just wanted to demonstrate with these quotes how you know, this is something that's been extremely established and we know is a good thing. Looking back to 1985, the single most significant factor influencing a child's early educational success is an introduction to books and being read to at home prior to school. 1993, children who have not already developed some basic literacy practice when they enter school are 3 to 4 times more likely to drop out. And so it goes on. And the OECD study from 2002, owning as few as 20 books equals a higher levels of education. And that study went on to draw parallels with income and so on to do with books. And then finally down there at the bottom, 2011, National Literacy Trust, 1 in 3 children do not own a book. 80% of young people who read at or above the expected level had books of their own for their age. And I've put in that one from 2011 because the studies that they do every year show exactly the same results pretty much. So the 2019 one has pretty much the same statistics in. The dial isn't really moving on the number of children who don't own a book. But, you know, the impact is there, so it's not new. And then we've got Dr. Janet Goodall, just to bring it up to date to 2020. And Dr. Goodall says, research shows that parental engagement with children's learning, even from the earliest days, is important for children's long-term achievements. Simple things, conversations, singing songs, reading books together, support children's language development and early reading skills. So that's backing up all that other research. So what's really exciting about Dr. Goodall is that she is sponsoring a PhD student who is evaluating the impact of Dolly Partons' Imagination Library on the home learning environment and parental engagement at the moment. And that's due to be completed next year. And Dr. Goodall's been working with a lot of families who receive our books as part of that. So that's a really exciting piece of research that we're looking forward to next year. And then finally, just to round off the general section, this is Stephen Marriott, Director, Evaluation Support Scotland, who supports charities to evaluate their work. And he says, if we already know that having access to books has an impact on children's interest in reading and literacy development, we shouldn't have to keep evidencing that over and over again, which I think is quite interesting. He's making the point that we know this is a great thing, small charities, etc., all have to keep making the point, and we know that investment in the early years is what has the biggest impact on closing the gap and levelling up, and that's what government should be doing, and that's where the focus should be. So that's kind of a more general picture, and if I move on to the impact that we think our programme has of book gifting, I'm just going to show you this slide. I know it's from the USA, but it's the only randomised controlled trial that has been done on imagination libraries anywhere where they operate. We're in the business of giving books to children, and obviously for an RCT you have to not give books to a group of children, and we're not entirely comfortable with that, among other reasons, but so that's why, you know, we've not been falling over ourselves to do one in the UK. Anyway, so Dr. Frank Ridsey from New York State, Department of Sociology, he was fascinated with the idea of the dosage and frequency of our books, that children get them every month and build up a library. So he discovered that for those consistently enrolled in the programme, and he took 3 to 4 years of the 5-year programme as his baseline, 28.9% more children were ready for kindergarten. Now, children in the US start school the term after they turn 5, so slightly older than children in England. And I think, just to say, the kindergarten readiness score thing looks at letter recognition, as I understand it. But even so, there was a huge uplift there in the cohort who had the books for 3 or more years. So I think the key point from that, in terms of our programme, is that dosage of frequency of children getting a book every month and it becoming a regular feature. So if I can just bring it right down to the UK, we know that frequency of reading is more important than socioeconomic status in predicting children's language growth. And the figures on here all directly relate to imagination libraries. If I start with the column in orange around the home learning environment, parents are inspired to read more with their children. Now, these figures here are an amalgamation of surveys from around our programmes and evaluations that parents have completed. So these include Southwark, where around 10,000 children receive our books every month. A small village that you might know, Lambourne, where we've got around 200 children receiving our books, and North Lincolnshire, where around 8,000 children receive our books. So around 95% of families read every day since receiving the books. And I think really encouragingly of that, around 43% of families have started using the public library more. So having these books in their homes has made them go out and find more books. They want more. And I should say around 20% typically in our survey say they already use public libraries. So we really need to work on that remainder to try and encourage that more. And then around 96% agree the programme has encouraged their child to enjoy reading and develop a love of books. And considering our mission is to develop a lifelong love of books and reading, we're always really encouraged by that. It's cracking. So what we're often asked is about this longitudinal impact. You know, does those benefits of reading with a child stay with them? Now, if we look at North Lincolnshire, we can talk about them because they've had the permissions to match their school data with the children who are receiving imagination library books, because the council pays for the programme there, and around 94% of children under 5 in North Lincolnshire receive the books every month. And that's been the case since 2013, so they've really invested in this in their early years. And what they've seen there is a 22% increase in children achieving that good level of development at the end of the early years foundation stage, which is an absolutely massive increase. And what particularly excites me about that is that 70% of boys now achieve a good level of development, compared to 56% of the cohort of boys not receiving books who are in that same bracket nationally. And I think that's a huge uplift for boys there, because if any of you involved in education will know that, you know, that's quite an issue of concern, that quite often boys perform less well at various stages. So if you can get them at the same level as the girls when you start, then I think that's a really major piece of the jigsaw. We get quite a bit of anecdotal evidence from our practitioners, particularly in certain pockets in the north, that there's quite a lot of parents who don't see reading to their little boys as important as reading to their little girls. They think little boys should be out building, playing outside in the mud or whatever, and you know, if they're inside, they should be building and constructing, that you don't sit and read to boys. And so we're very mindful of that with our books, to try and make sure that none of the books would put potentially a boy off reading. But to see that impact that it's had on boys' good level of development, I think it's really encouraging. And finally, as the cohort from 2013 moves on up through school, we've seen a lasting impact on the Year 1 phonics check, with 84% of children receiving our books meeting the standard, compared to 76% not registered. So that's really encouraging to see, and we're very much looking forward to that cohort going on to do their SATs, to see if the uplift from the Imagination Library continues to have an impact. So it's really important for us that we pick the right books. You know, these are high quality books that we're giving to children, and this is our book selection committee, the 3 that agreed to be photographed. And we're really lucky in that we have children's librarians, we have early years practitioners, we have the head of early years from Book Trust Scotland, we have a representative from Northern Ireland, and they're so knowledgeable about what we do. And the idea is that if you look at the photograph of all the books lined out, that's what it looks like when we've picked the 60 books for that year. And it's just fabulous. We try and get the board books for babies, and then going up to case-bound books for more older children. And, you know, that's really important for us that the books are correct. What I'd just like to show you as an example, I'm just checking my time that I haven't gone on too long. What's really important for us, just in my last minute, is to show you the books for Group 6 for next year. We're really excited about this, and you can see the variety that we've got there. We've got a fact-based book in birds and insects. We've got Look Up, which has already won awards. We've got Choose Llamas, which is quite off the wall. It has cracking illustrations, it's got brilliant rhymes, and we've got We're All Wonders there in the centre. And RJ Palaccio says that if you're human, I write for you, which I just think is such a wonderful sentiment. And we've got Baby on Board over there. That's over 35 years old since that was first published. And we bring in stuff like that because the illustrations are so rich and so wonderful, and they're possibly unlike any other book that children will have seen. So we, you know, Penguin let us dig right in and drag out all sorts of wonders. We've got a Mr. Gumpy by John Birmingham that's just gone out this month to our children who are 4, and I was so excited about that one. I thought it was wonderful. But yeah, we're also very mindful, sorry, this will be my last point, also very mindful that some of these books are going to children whose parents speak English as an additional language. Their own literacy skills might not be the strongest. So we make sure that every book in our programme, the illustrations stand up on their own, so that everybody can find a path through that book and get something meaningful from it. So for example, if you see Just Imagine down there by Nick Sherratt and Pippa Goodhart, you know, it's just so rich in illustrations and pictures and finding your own way through the story, that there's something in there for everyone. Because in Southwark, there's 53 different languages spoken by the parents who receive these books. So it's really important that they're accessible for everybody. There we go, that's my 15 minutes up. Sorry, I could talk all day about books, but there we go. I hope that's been useful for you. And please, if you've got any questions after the session, or you'd like to start an Imagination Library in your community, please do get in touch.
Thank you, Helen. I think that was a wonderful introduction to the work you do, and your enthusiasm is infectious. I'm wanting to get hold of some of those books and have a look at them now, although my kids probably wouldn't thank me. They're a bit big now to be looking at those, but thank you very much, and I'm sure there'll be questions that will come up in the chat box for you to come back to later. So without further ado, can I ask Jane to unmute yourself? Welcome, Jane. Do you want to start by introducing yourself and talking about the work of Arch and what you do?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Adrian. I'm Jane Rendle from Arch, which is an Oxfordshire charity, assisted reading for children. Arch is our acronym. For over 12 years now, we've been providing trained, supported, resourced reading helper volunteers to primary school children. Before lockdown, we were working with about 1,000 children every year in about 120 primary schools across the county. And what our wonderful volunteers do is provide 2 happy half an hours for the children they work with each week in school, enjoying books, sharing the books, sharing the reading, talking about the pictures, general conversation, and playing lovely games. So it's to get across the joy that you can have sharing a book with an adult, with an interested adult as well. Something that a lot of children don't experience at home, sadly, for lots and lots of different reasons. Children are chosen by their individual primary schools for the support. Can be a variety of reasons. Very often they're chosen because the schools know they need a little bit of nurturing support as well. Perhaps they don't have any books at home, they don't have anyone to read with at home for lots of different reasons. So they know those children are really lacking in that support. And we know how important, we've just heard from Helen, how important that is at primary level and really from babyhood as well. The volunteers provide the support. It's a long-term project, so for a whole year for those children. So they become special friends for those children in school. So they're not teaching, they're just establishing a lovely relationship, and they're a special friend that comes into school for those children. We work with the volunteers very closely, as well as their initial training. We provide ongoing training and support. We want them to get as much from it as the children do. And I think, you know, everyone does. That's very important. They get to know their children very well. Each volunteer works with just 2 or 3 children, so the same children for a whole year. They get to know them very well, better than their teachers sometimes, because it's individual support. And through that, we can work with them to provide the books that will really hook those children's reading interest. They may not have come across books that they enjoy at school, haven't got any at home, don't get taken to libraries. So the volunteers are very important people. And it's such a joy to find a book that will hook a child into reading. So they say, do you know, I think I might quite like working with you. That's so motivating. And through that, you can change the whole path of the child's life, really. So it's a vital service.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful, and I really love the relationship aspect of that with the person reading to the child. So, how's that work been impacted by COVID, and what are you doing now? We're again under lockdown.
Yeah, drastically, obviously impacted by COVID back in March when all primary schools closed to most pupils. So we have 300 volunteers sitting at home doing nothing, worrying about their children as well. So we sprung into action, and very early on we were very lucky to have a grant from the Community Foundation of £10,000, which was wonderful because it was such a worrying time for all of us within the organisation. So that helped no end, gave us confidence, and we just thought, right, what can we do? So we were in contact with all our schools, because the majority of schools were open, of course, but just for key worker children. How can we support your children? How can we support you? We used our website more, we used our YouTube channel more, Twitter and Facebook, so we became more active. And what we developed was a letter writing project. So linking volunteers who were sitting at home with their children, either they were in school or perhaps via the school would get the letters to the children at home. So it was, you know, an admin heavy process, but we managed to get a lovely letter writing project off the ground. It was lovely when we had a few letters back from the children as well to the volunteers, and we had to bear in mind safeguarding, so everything was done by the Arch office and by the schools, so not direct contact between volunteers and children. But that was really well received, and you know, we had a head teacher saying how wonderful that although we can't have the reading sessions in school, these children have now got a grown-up pen friend. So you know, that evolved, things like that. We were also supporting our volunteers as well. The majority of our volunteers are retired, of course, because they've got time to give, and so we were aware that, you know, some of them could be isolated, so we were very much keeping in contact with all our volunteers. We sent them quizzes and newsletters and did whatever we could to keep everyone engaged. But it has been a very, very difficult time for the charity. Now, from September, schools have reopened, of course, and we are gradually making resuming sessions in schools. We're not back in every school, unfortunately, because schools are quite reticent about having extra visitors at the moment, so that's quite sad for us. The more confident schools have allowed us back in, and that's great. We had to develop COVID safe procedures. Over the summer we did lots of risk assessments, and we've come up with what we think is an adapted way of working to keep everyone safe, including 2 copies of every book. So whereas in the old world the volunteer and child would sit side by side and enjoy the same book together, now they enjoy the same book but they have 2 individual copies and they're sitting at 2 metre distance. So that is different, and it's different for our volunteers to get used to. But it's so important for us to keep everyone safe. So we have book boxes in schools now. We had to replace every single book box, 300 book boxes, replaced by a COVID edition, which has duplicate copies of every book, which are kept separate for safety, visors for our volunteers, sanitizers and hand gel as well. So we've done everything we possibly can to keep everyone safe, and it is working, but we're not back in every school. And of course, it's not right for every one of our volunteers to return at the moment. That's the sad thing as well. Even though they want to, you know, a lot of volunteers have got a few worries about returning. And if they haven't, sometimes their family members have. So what we're looking to do is more recruitment, but I'll come on to that in a minute.
I was going to come on to that. It puts me in mind, I used to work with someone whose grandchildren moved, I think, to New Zealand, and they sent copies of books over to them, and then she'd sit in, you know, probably first thing in the morning in the UK, reading the kids, their grandkids, a bedtime story in New Zealand with the same book. Yeah, so I think there are creative ways, and you've clearly thought a lot and done a lot of work to find some of those ways. So what's going to be your focus over the next year or so?
Well, more volunteer recruitment, and we know what a big need there is, don't we? We all know that now, and we've just heard the Ofsted report that was published yesterday, showing that children have regressed. I mean, not only in reading and writing, and Arch volunteers can help with the reading and writing, of course, but, you know, social skills, communication skills, and that's something we can also help with, but we need the people. And we need the resources. We need far more duplicate books, actually, but we also need to recruit far more volunteers. And we have, I would say, diluted our volunteer requirements. So pre-COVID, we were quite strict. Everyone has to commit for a year, at least. Most of them go on year after year because they enjoy it so much. But it is a long-term commitment. And we do ask for twice weekly sessions of an hour and a half, and that's during the school day. So for a lot of people, that's not possible. You know, now we're thinking there are more people working from home. Could they take extended lunch hours and volunteer? There are students, they could be sixth formers, they could be gap year students sitting, they can't travel. Could they volunteer for a year? We feel we're looking at a different, perhaps, demographic of volunteers, and perhaps if people can only offer 1 hour a week, that would be great, because they could help 2 children and really make a difference to their lives by inspiring them to read. There's such a big need. So I think we're just looking at numbers, really. But, you know, we do have that the commitment, and the vetting and the interview and the training process has to still go ahead. So, you know, we do still want the quality, but that's reduced time commitment.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jane. That's been really fascinating. And do tweet us your volunteer adverts, and we'll share it with our networks. And anyone here today, please do share it with your networks, because it'd be great to get more people volunteering. We may well come back to you with the questions, but thank you very much for now.
Thank you.
Could I invite Bob to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Welcome, Bob. Thank you for making time this afternoon. It's lovely to see you in amongst your hectic radio schedule. Could you introduce yourself and tell us about the Maggie Evans Fund, please?
Yes, well, I'm Bob Evans, and I'm very grateful to be able to talk about our charity, because it's very small compared with the ones we've heard about. And some of the things that have been said, of course, we overlap with, and I don't need to repeat them. But we grew out of a very particular tragedy. because 12 years ago tomorrow, as it happens, we lost our daughter Maggie. And it was one of those unfathomable suicides of a person who was doing very well in life. And one of the things that she was doing, I mean, her profession as she was making it was working as a budding literary agent in London with children's books. And she loved books, and we love books. My wife's been a librarian and so on. So we thought the best we could do, thanks to support from generous donations with friends and so on, was to try and help in this area. And we looked around, this is sort of 10 years ago, we looked around, we had two pieces of luck. One of them, of course, was the Community Foundation, which exists, as we discovered, in order to help little charities like ours, so that we don't have to worry too much about the money, and we trust it's coming in as very professionally managed. But the other bit of luck before the Community Foundation, before we knew about that, was the Story Museum. And most people viewing will know about the Story Museum. It was just starting then, and they were already working with schools. They hadn't got a museum or much in the way of buildings at that stage, but they had this mission. And so we've really entrusted the workings of the Maggie Fund to go through the Story Museum, and they've had some brilliant ideas. And the one that's relevant today is what we call Extreme Reading Adventures, which is a way of trying to motivate kids. And if you like, I'll say a bit more about that specifically as a scheme. Shall I do that?
Yeah, it sounds exciting. Please explain it and tell us more about it.
Well, it consists, of course, it's fairly tightly focused. It has to be a limited number of children. But the idea is to enthuse children through story, through the power of story, which of course doesn't have to be made up stories. There are real stories too. And my old profession of history is all about stories. And so there's plenty of stories to go around. And the Story Museum exists in order to inspire children through story. And what we've done specifically with this intervention is to have a small number of kids chosen from schools. We've discovered that it's very helpful to have continuity. It's a bit like Arch, of course, in that respect, or the Dollywood, that we use the same schools, so we really get to know teachers, we get the competence of parents, and we can also get long-term feedback. And the particular point of the scheme is to have engagement activities associated with the book. So if you haven't got lockdown, then the children actually come to the Story Museum, or they're on location somewhere. If you've got a story which involves the river, take them out in a boat. If there's some food in the story, have a cooking session. You see what I mean? And it really has gone wonderfully well, we think, and we're expanding it a bit. This year, with the limitations, we up to 100 children have been receiving, of course, through the post and so on, beautifully packed up, and with challenges for them to come back on. But they've been doing it at home. But that's the way we're moving, and we have sought to get proper evaluation from the very beginning. We paid out quite a bit in order to get professional, a bit like we heard from Helen, professional evaluation. So it's qualitative, of course. We're not ticking boxes. We're not. We can't. In a few weeks, we can't teach children in ways which help with SATs and so on specifically. But we can test their overall commitment and of their parents and so on to the idea of reading and working with books, or at least with online reading.
Thank you. And I mean, as a funder, obviously there's a lot of charities on the call today. I think they'd probably be interested to know from you what it is that impresses you and what you look for, and what you want to fund as a funder, and how you make those sorts of decisions. What thoughts go through your mind? You mentioned evidence and evaluation, but I'm sure there's other things as well.
Yes, well, in a way, we're probably not sort of typical consumer in that respect, because we did sign up with the Story Museum. We're not bound to the Story Museum, we could go somewhere else. But so far, we've had such a wonderful experience, because, of course, it's been 10 years that the Story Museum itself has been evolving. So we want to know that the Story Museum is delivering, and we want to know what kind of things the Story Museum is delivering. And we want to be a little bit involved, although, of course, we keep our distance. We don't interfere. But I think the flexibility that we've got, well, not least with your Community Foundation, which allows us to pick and choose, and maybe in certain ways where we've got synergies with the Community Foundation, what it's doing, because otherwise you wouldn't have this webinar. So there are all sorts of additional ways in which I think we can benefit from cooperating with these various parties.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, I think we may well come back to you with some of the questions. And whilst Kate is getting on top of the chat box, can I invite Jimmy Gordon to unmute yourself? Because I think you may well have a question.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
To introduce yourself as well, Jimmy.
Yes, I'm a trustee of the Elizabeth Jane Foundation, which my late wife, Jane Waits, established many years ago. I have to confess, as a father and grandfather, I've never been very good at encouraging my offspring to do things that I know I'm not good at. So I'm curious to know how you encourage those parents who have either literacy or other learning difficulties to be enthusiastic sharers of stories. Obviously, one of the examples we heard was books with illustrations, but other ideas, other ways in which you encourage those for whom reading is difficult, the parent for whom reading is difficult.
Had a similar question came in on email from Kanta Gopal, who's an educator, and she was saying her dad, growing up in rural India, had to share a candle or a light with several other people to read, and he went on to get a bachelor's and a master's. And why is it we struggle so much with some families in this country? So interesting. Who would like to come in on that? Helen.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And one thing that we're quite clear of with our partners is that we see them as the experts in that. We're good at picking books that families and children can enjoy and that hopefully are accessible, with whoever we're dealing with. But some of our best projects are ones where there's parental support and added value added locally by people who know the families and who are experts. And that's why the OCF project is so great. And our project with Pete in Oxfordshire, because they're the experts on the ground who know the families and can provide that support and encouragement in a really appropriate way, rather than us saying from up high, this is what you should do. So that's really the key for us, is trying to empower and encourage local support on the ground from people who know their families.
Yeah, thank you. And Jane, I'm guessing a lot of the kids you work with are probably ones whose parents may not have the strongest literacy skills. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we don't have any contact with the parents because all our support is arranged by the primary school. So it would be the school that let the parents know that the children were having the arch support. I mean, we have come across parents in the past who actually approached their children's school and admitted that they actually aren't good enough readers, sadly, to help their children. And then those children have gone on to work with an arch volunteer. I think it's far more difficult as an adult, isn't it, to admit that, first of all, and to get the support. And it's how you get those families reading at home. It's quite tricky, not something that we get involved in. But there are organisations, there's a national charity called Beanstalk, who run online courses for parents who want to help their children. But it's not being judgmental, and that's the key thing, isn't it? There are parents who admit that they can't help their children and are open to getting that support, but there are other family situations whereby perhaps they don't want the support, they're not open to it. Also, I think families are struggling a lot at the moment, particularly, and there are so many stresses and strains on families that I think it's important not to say, well, it should be happening in the home, and it isn't. We are where we are, particularly with the pandemic and illness, and sometimes with all the best intentions, reading just isn't happening at home.
Thank you. And Bob, I don't know you, or I know we've got a couple of people from the Story Museum here. If you want to unmute and share some thoughts on that, Bob.
It would be rather nice if they were given the chance just to respond to that particular question, I think.
Izzy's
yeah, I can answer that. I can answer that question. I'm Izzy. I'm head of learning at the Story Museum. So our extreme reading project, what we find is that the students, well, the children are actually the ambassadors for the parents and for the museum reciprocally. So once we've brought them to the museum pre-COVID days to have their exciting experiences, their books, etc., and building that up over the 5 weeks. And they get taxis as well in order to get here, because that's often a very basic barrier that prevents people coming to the museum. Once we've built up that over the 5 weeks, the 6th week, we invite all of the families to come with their parents, with their siblings, to look around the museum. And we find that the children are showing the parents the way. They feel very comfortable there. They can explain the stories that are there. And because we're a physical space, you can actually, although they are based on classic works of literature, such as Narnia and the Wardrobe, for example, they can make their own stories based on the space. And it's a really lovely way to culminate it and then continue that that reading journey. And just to add something about evaluation as well, what we found, as Bob said, this year we're doing 100 children with the analogue, sending the books out and writing letters back and continuing that journey that way. So we might be able to do it with a lot more children, the 100 children. But it's wonderful that we invited all the alumni of the original scheme, of whom there were 88 children, and 20 said that they wanted to continue with it. And this is going back since 2014, the original iteration of it. So it was really gratifying to see the long-term effect in that way. I just adding that in.
Great, thank you, Izzy. That's really good to hear. Amanda Ferguson, I think you wanted to ask something about the educational impact of COVID-19 and government measures. Are you?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Hello, hi. Yeah, I'm from Quest for Learning, and we do reading programs, literacy programs in schools with children in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And we're really interested looking at the attainment gap in Oxfordshire, which is actually, and there's clearly some amazing work going on, and it's always really inspiring to hear what everyone else is up to. But there is a genuine attainment gap in Oxfordshire that is widening. Even before COVID, was widening in Oxfordshire, whereas in the rest of the county and the rest of the country, sorry, it was narrowing. And I'd just be really interested to know what the panel thinks in terms of statutory funding, or in terms of third sector engagement needs to be done really in Oxfordshire particularly to try and narrow that gap. What is it that we're not doing to narrow that attainment gap? Be really interested to hear what people think.
So, huge question, huge challenge. Anyone got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think in somewhere like Oxfordshire, where there's pockets and it's not, say, a large area, it's really hard to struggle to target. It's the same in West Berkshire. There are real pockets of deprivation, but they're so tiny and spread out, it makes it really hard to target anything statutory that would have an impact on that. But I guess I would come back to talking about our books, and I think that's the joy of what we do, in that you can have a universal programme very, very cheaply that doesn't stigmatise or label or anything, and does provide something there. So I think for me, it's all about investment across the early years, at that early stage, and having quality provision for 2-year-olds onwards and engaging them, and having the local education authorities engaged in making sure the families that really need it are involved. And that's part of the work I do with our partners, is to say, right, how do you reach the hard to reach? The pointy-elbowed parents like myself will always make sure our kids get the free books, but how do you then make sure that the parents who wouldn't have books in their home and would really benefit from the service get the books? And I think that's where the magic can be added, is to make sure everybody can access those services which are universal.
The other thing which I just want to mention, I love the fact that books are being circulated like this, because I'm a publishing person and a book obsessive. But I recently went to the CILIP conference, which is a library conference. It happened to be in Brighton that year. And one of the speakers there was from Every Library, which is a lobbying foundation in the US to keep libraries open. And they had an interesting point. What they said was they don't lobby the people who go to the library. What they do in terms of funding and support for keeping libraries open is to go to the people that appreciate the value of libraries. And so they might actually be people who are very educated and been through various academic institutions or are rich or whatever. And they ask for sponsorship from those people. And so because I work with Sophia, the Abingdon Community Larder, we have a lot of kids come in, and a lot of kids Sophia help have dropped out of school for whatever reason. And what occurred to me, just particularly with the Dollywood Foundation, was that we have a lot of early years children come into the larder. And I love books, I've always had them, but I know that so many children don't, and I think quite a lot of the people that come into the larder are underprivileged and struggle in that way. So I wonder if there's a good link there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thought. I think especially as we hopefully start to look to a life beyond COVID with the vaccine being announced, thinking about having book libraries alongside food community larders would be fantastic. Kate, I think we've had a very active chat box. Is there anything you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, there are several comments actually about resources and provision for children for whom English is a second language. Questions about, for example, from Banbury Mosque. I think you had your hand up, so perhaps you could say a bit more about that.
Was that Yasmin from Banbury Mosque?
Yes, it is. Yes, hiya.
Hi,
absolutely fantastic reading. I love it. My children read, but I've come into the community, supporting the community, and reading is just not considered as valuable. And I think there's lots and lots of things that we've got to pick out here, and I can sort of support with the picking out bits where what I'm thinking is parents' second language. We've got library time, because the parents can't read, so they don't go to the library. It's almost like that barrier that you put off for learning. We've got the community fridge here, so if we could link it with the community fridge, that they come to collect the food, they can come and hop in to get a book. So it's almost like linked, because they come to collect the food. Food is important, they need food, so they'll come in and say, oh, have half an hour for a library book, and get a library book. So we've 101% would support you with that. And again, being in the Grimsby area, which is sort of in the deprivation area, definitely there's a need, not just for the BAME community, but I think there's the wider community as well. More than happy to be a pilot for the programme. Anybody's got any suggestion, and I will encourage every parent to pick up a book or help the child to read. If it means that we have to get volunteers that sit at the mosque, then we'll do that to work with the parents and the schools, because we already work with the primary schools in the area. So anything we can do, more than happy to sort of take it on board. I'm sort of really excited. I want to get a book and start reading myself. And to add to this, we're actually renovating we haven't got a library, so we're refitting our library. So what a fantastic time for this to happen. So our library's been refitted in the next 3-4 weeks. We haven't got not one book at all. Right. The books we've got are mainly to do with our Islam and the sort of the religion. So what we thought we could do is we could maybe have a selection of books, and from that we could maybe add to the collection. So it's almost like our library's sort of going to be come up and running, but we could also add English books in, bilingual books in. So any suggestions, any ideas, if anybody wants to work with us, more than happy to be a pilot for this programme.
Can I make one suggestion?
Go for it.
I know this sounds a bit random, but it will link to books, so forgive me for a second. If you follow the Orkney Library in Scotland on Twitter, one of the things that they host, and I think they do this annually, is a teddy bear sleepover.
Okay.
So we did this in our church in Dorchester.
Yeah.
So what happens is the kids bring their bears and they pay about £3, and then the bears sleep in the church, not the children. And then there's a series of photographs of, I don't know, bears doing really silly things, parachuting off the stairs or whatever. And then the next day they pick up their children with an adventure photo or series of photos of the bears doing stuff, and potentially a book or something like that. So I was just thinking it was a really fun way of getting kids to come into the church, and obviously for because that can be an issue.
So we've got the community already. So we've already got the community that comes to the mosque, but you find that they probably wouldn't go to the library, whereas they've come to the mosque because they've come for prayers. It's an area they know. So again, we're sort of making it breaking that barrier down. We're bringing the books for them to come here. So if they're coming to the mosque between 5 and 7, we can say, okay, half an hour, we'll take the child away, and the child can read in the mosque, whether it's a book, whatever, just to, encourage them to read, and we could have it that way. So it's almost like we sort of cohesion, we're doing things together to make, give the child a better life. I've just got so much passion, and it's like, wow, books, I'm getting excited. I mean, I've got brainstorming ideas happening. So please, bear us in mind. Any suggestions, just please send us an email or through Adrian, and then happy to work with anybody, and especially with our new library coming up, very keen to get some books in and get reading.
Thank you, Yasmin. Again, wonderful, infectious enthusiasm for books, which just makes me want to go and stop working and pick up a book. But unfortunately, we are at time, so we're going to have to draw things to a close. But thank you very much to Helen. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone else who's contributed for a really, really fascinating and quite energising session, which is lovely at this time of lockdown. We will be back just before Christmas on the 16th of December to look at the economic impacts of COVID and lockdown in more detail. So do come along for what should be another interesting session, and we will go through the chat box. We will share the video, and we will try and respond to all the questions in the chat if we haven't been able to come to them directly. But thank you very much for your time, and do have a good week.